Hey everyone, and welcome to Beyond the Raise podcast, where we get under the hood of founder scaling stories. Will and I are lucky to be here with Andrew Holt, CEO of Kenoteq. Welcome to the podcast, Andrew.
Thank you. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning. Thanks for coming. So, in today's episode, the sort of the theme is around, the hard part isn't necessarily innovation, it's commercializing climate technology in legacy industries. So I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation. The sensible place to start, Andrew, is tell us a little about yourself, but also what Kenoteq are building.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. Myself, I started my working life off in the engineering field, moved into the manufacturing field. Engineering's an incredibly interesting and exciting game, but there's no thanks in engineering. It doesn't matter whether it's going good or whether it's going bad. You're always in trouble. So I decided to move into manufacturing, spent a large part of my life in manufacturing, moved up into senior management, and then moved across by nature of job, moved into the steel industry where I took on the role of group supply chain director. So quite a wide range of experience, but basically always been in factories, predominantly in corporate. And that's what took me into Kenoteq. And Kenoteq I found very interesting. Kenoteq, we are creating a sustainable product through a brick made through recycled material, and in this process embracing the circular economy, which generates that low carbon footprint, but obviously helps with a lot of other issues such as land waste issues and reuse of material and taking away from basically digging out the earth, if you like, and depleting our finite resources.
Fantastic. Yeah, I when you sort of think about it, I mean that's a very required product, but I imagine it is quite hard to get people to shift away from the traditional brick. But we'll talk more about that in a minute. So, how did the business originally emerge from Heriot-Watt University? What sort of happened there?
I think it's like a lot of things that the our current significant investors, one of the local families here up outside of Edinburgh, had a recycling business, and they looked at it, being a very conscientious bunch of people, not just saying, well, the business is a means to make money. In terms of recycling, it's, well, what do we do and how do we maximize the good effect of recycling? So they decided that they're going to approach Heriot-Watt University. Um, Again, university up here in Edinburgh. They're pretty well known for their innovation and their spin out generation. So, in connection with one of our other co founders, Professor Gabriela Madero, who is a full time professor at Heriot-Watt, they sat down and they had a look and they said, okay, we've got these waste materials. What can we do with it? And from there, technical development started, had a look at this, and we said, well, let's make a brick. That's
Yeah.
kind of one of the real great opportunities here. So not only the product that the waste recycling company were offering, then you start looking further afield and saying, okay, what can we use? And we ended up in a position where we'll be able to utilize over 90% of waste material in this product. So yeah, it
Wow.
started from there as things is quite a serendipitous meeting. And here we are today.
Wow. Amazing. I was going to ask, for people that are unfamiliar with the space, what problem you're trying to solve. I think you sort of covered that. But one thing that would be interesting is what is the material that you're using to create these bricks, or is that top secret sauce?
Part of it's top secret. The bulk of it, and we're quite happy to say, the bulk of it is construction and demolition waste.
Ah,
Effectively, you knock down all the buildings, or it could be slightly from earthworks and so on. But all of this waste that gets generated, instead of in the old days where it would go to landfill or something like that, now goes to plants, typically what you'd call a wash plant, where they crush it down into various sizes, goes through a wet process and a screening process, and delivers a whole range of aggregate, from fine material, which looks like fine sand, stepping up to a slightly bigger material, which in the building industry we call the sharp sand. So
mhm.
slightly small little stones and a bit of fine material, going up into the different stones, 6 mil, 10 mil, 15 mil, 20 mil, whatever that will be, which can then be used in a variety of different applications. So yeah, the majority of it is that we use a recycled pigment for the coloration of our product. The other product, which was is actually gypsum, which is the one that came from the original recycling company in the conversation that started the building. So gypsum boards, so all your ceiling boards or wall-in partition boards and so on that go into properties, that gets recycled. There's a lot of companies out there doing that, recycled. And then we have a binder, proprietary binder. That's the little sort of top secret part. And we have a very low temperature cure process. So you
Okay.
put all of those in together, we've now taken and reused a very wide amount of materials. We don't add an awful lot of heat to it. So the product of that is an ultra low carbon footprint. So
Excellent.
it's something that, it's very exciting to the market.
Mm.
We touched on the circular economy side, as I said before as well. So it's not just the low carbon. You're addressing several different issues by using these recycled processes.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And then why is it you feel that legacy sort of sectors and specifically construction are so difficult, to disrupt?
Well, I mean, you look, if you talk about us specifically, and we're talking about the building brick, I mean, you can go back under correction. I think I've read somewhere that the first building bricks are somewhere around 7,000 BC, so they've had plenty of time in the market to prove themselves. Then you have, I don't believe there's any companies that were around in those days, but there's definitely companies that have been around for a few hundred years. So
Yeah.
you're talking about a product that has been tried and tested over centuries. You're talking about companies that have been in the market, for a couple of 100 years. And all of a sudden we come up with this product that's made in a slightly different way, and you're asking people to trust you.
Mm.
So it's a very interesting and very difficult position to break in against things like that.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense.
So, Andrew, just looking at the sort of reality of commercializing climate innovation, I think a lot of climate businesses can prove their technology in theory, but then commercialization is often where things become difficult. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question. Like you say, it's easy to prove it in theory, and that's what certification's about. I guess we can talk about. But I think what I've just mentioned there, Will, is you're looking at a product that's been in the market for thousands of years, if you like. You trust it. It's like all sorts of products. Well, if we use something, it could be a house cleaner or whatever that you use. You've used it. Your mum used to use it. Your dad used to use it. That we used to use this. We just carry on using it. I think for something like the brick as well, where you have an element of where it goes into being a safety critical item. I mean, you can't be building buildings that are going to fall down in a couple of days. So trust is a massive requirement, I think, when you want to buy something. So we come along and we say, hey, we've got a brick. It looks like a brick. It feels like a brick, but it's made a bit differently. And people say, well, show us what it does. I said, well, I can show you a certificate, but, I can't show you a building that's been there for 150 years. So it's very difficult to compete with that. And so that I'd say that the trust element of the product, it's tried and tested.
Yeah. We're all creatures of habit, aren't we, really?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And what do you think, what have been the sort of hardest barriers to that product, to adoption? Is it that?
It is. I mean, there's obviously there's a lot of people out there who are, let's say, forward thinking. They want to take the next step. They're looking for the new, exciting, innovative products and so on and so forth. I guess the easy answer would be, though, it's price. To be quite straight, it is an easy answer. When you're looking at a market where it's commoditized, or you've got a different range of products. You've got the commodity product that you buy in low end, and it's super high volume. Then you have the higher end premium price products, which sort of fall into a different category, which are ourselves. It's a facing product. It's very difficult when you are an expensive item, as we are, because we're just starting up. In manufacturing, economies of scale plays a huge role. So we are currently on the more expensive end. We are in the premium price range. But again, you're going back into projects where nobody's ever seen it. You're going into areas where value and volume are very critical. So we're pitching this brand new product, which is on the more expensive side. There's a lot of comparable brick products in that price range, but in the sustainable construction range, there are other products. There's wooden products and so on and so forth. So it's like a lot of jobs that go out there, a lot of projects rather that go out there. You pitch architects, there's a lot of architects supporting, they love it, and they'll specify it. And then we get to the good old stage where people look at the pricing, and there's this beautiful term called value engineering. And this is where then, from a constructor's side, they have the opportunity then to make the budget look a bit better. And that puts a lot of pressure on. And to be fair, that's where we've potentially lost out on, and not necessarily a competitive product. It could be something else, which for us sometimes gets a little bit frustrating because the initial scope of the project, where people want to achieve certain carbon targets and certain looks and feels and so on, then gets changed on a price basis, which, it's very difficult to handle. It's saying that you want to buy a car. I want a Ferrari, but I end up with a Mini. They're both cars, but they're both very different from where you started. So that's probably the challenge that we face on that respect. Yeah, price definitely takes us out of the volume market at the moment because it is premium and not commodity.
Do you think people, it's a bit of a harsh phrase, but do you think people care about price, or do you think they kind of start out, sorry, not the price, do you think people care about the circular economy aspect? Or have you found in reality, they start out sort of almost talking a good game, but then ultimately it just comes down to the price and kind of money talks?
Yeah, exactly. Probably 99% or at least some high number like that would be very true, and for good reason. The economy and, pricing within that economy drives most things in life for all of us.
Right.
You have different groups of people. There are a lot of people out there very passionate about having the right products with the right green credentials, and they will buy what they want. It gets very difficult in certain bigger buildings with volume. When you start multiplying a small number by a big number, it still becomes a big number. So you can understand that. But yeah, money talks at the end of the day, unfortunately, to the large part of it.
So how do you overcome that? I mean, that's a really difficult challenge, probably something that keeps you up at night and trying to solve, right? But how do you sort of focus on overcoming it?
I guess that it's the same problem that all upstarts, spin outs, all companies face when they start. Most companies probably face when they start. We have to prove the technology, and we have to do that. We've already covered that and saying, I can show you a certification, but that doesn't necessarily pay the bills. We need to get a footprint in the marketplace. We need to grow the exposure or increase the exposure rather of the product. In a manufactured item, economies of scale always kick in. So once you can get it in and you can grow and you can scale, then there's ways of bringing that price down through, greater, as I said, economies of scale in manufacturing and so on. And of course, as you start selling more, you start hitting your financial thresholds and so on and so forth. But it's one of those where it's difficult to start. There is a way out, but you have to work and sell your way through it. And you have to get to that point in your growth cycle that then does start allowing you to. In saying that, currently there would appear to be a little bit of a misconception where people think, recycled material is cheap because it's used material. Unfortunately, it's not. Just like where you would mine a primary material or you would manufacture a primary material, recycled material goes through various processes to get where it is. They don't just knock a building down and drop a whole lot of rubble off at us. There is the wash plant, there is the storage, there is the logistics. So, you add in that on to the cost of getting that material in the first place. It costs money to knock down a building. It costs money to move that material. It costs so the supply chain, it adds cost. So it's not a cheap product. Yeah, I guess in time, those sort of cycles will find their own place and they will start reducing the cost as it grows as well. But let's say for the very sort of short term, price will be a problem. And I do believe that there are a lot of people in the green space, if you like, that battle with the same thing. It's not necessarily a cheap product by nature of the material and the processes that go into it.
Do you think that, I mean, look, to get sort of large scale adoption, do you think that you need policy change? I'm not familiar with whether there are sort of policies and regulations in place, but I know, to kind of achieve that initially in solar, there was, feed-in tariffs and things like that to, commercial incentives to push larger scale adoption. Ultimately, at the point at which the consumer has to decide on price, if they're still going to go with the cheaper option, but yet in the grand scheme of things, larger scale adoption, the circular economy, reducing that is all going to benefit everybody. So that sort of juxtaposition doesn't tally. I mean, is that then solved through policy, or I mean, what are your going slightly off topic, but just interested to get your thoughts on that.
It's, I mean, that is a great question because obviously, policy, if legislation was implemented to force people into a behavior and that behavior then benefits our product, then yeah, absolutely, that would help, without a shadow of a doubt. As a business and trying to build a robust business, we can't rely on that. You have to be able to stand on your own 2 feet, which I believe we can. I believe the product, there's a lot of people out there that still want to create a greener future, if you like, and use the right products and use the right processes that run into that. I mean, policy, if you just take a look at where we are at the moment, from a UK perspective, there's a party that are coming up that are getting quite popular that are saying that, let's just ban net zero. We don't need it. You've got the gentleman on the other side of the pond that's saying, pump more oil. We don't need this. We don't need that. So you've got at various times and time cycles, you've got different people in positions to do different things. Now, I do believe ultimately that we do need to create policy, and ultimately we will drive towards a lot more regulation around reuse of material, carbon footprint, and so on and so forth. But yeah, you can't rely on that. Like I said, it depends on who comes in next and which direction they take. Again, in saying that, it is obviously very difficult because it costs money. And, you can't just shut down existing businesses and swap them for new greener businesses. There's, just look at oil. You can go into the debate and depending on where you sit with it, but the reality is it is needed. Yeah, sure, it has a high carbon effect, but it is needed. So you can't just shut it down. It's going to take time to work away with these things. So it's a very difficult position. But yeah, if we'd love policy, we'd love somebody to tell you you have to buy our bricks. We would absolutely love that. But that's not what we're planning for. That would be very good if it came along, and sometime soon would be even better. But no, as a business, we can't put our eggs in that basket. I don't think you'd be successful with that.
No, not sure. And do you think, is there anything that maybe you or kind of just other climate founders and senior leaders that you speak to underestimate about how hard kind of behavioral and industry change actually is? It sounds like, you talked about you're probably in one of the oldest industries known to man. So, you're right at the thick end of that.
I think to a degree, it's like everything. Until you've actually tried it, you don't know. I think a lot of people who start businesses have great intention, have great dreams, have very high goals that are set. And so you should, I don't believe you should walk in there and start a business saying, I hope this works. And if it does, I hope we can try and achieve this. You've got to shoot for the stars, but you've got to understand and be able to take on board and process and work through problems when they come up. So I think there's, under no illusion that it's going to be difficult. Maybe in some scenarios you're thinking, 6, 7 years ago, you're thinking, well, legislation's on its way, so that will help. So, things, and we just spoke about legislation. Maybe that's why we partly as well now we say don't rely on it because, things change. And at the time, it was like, yeah, it's all guns blazing. These things are going to happen. And then, wars break out and conflicts start and economies slow down. And who saw that a few years ago? So, yeah, you understand it will be tough, maybe not quite as tough from our side anyway. We thought that we might have been a bit further along by now. So yeah, we've been dealt a few sticky cards that we didn't expect, for sure. But we pivot, we learn, we keep our chin up, and all those good things.
No, absolutely, and you're right. I mean, it's you got to roll with the punches. I mean, for another business that Will and I have, who were heavily in the American space in renewables, and then Trump came along, and it just sort of, I was going to
Yeah,
say slowly disappeared, but it was pretty much overnight. A
yeah,
lot of the wind stuff we were involved in just, gone immediately. So, you have to roll with the punches and have plan Bs and plan Cs for sure.
absolutely.
And then a little bit more about, because I think anyone listening to this might be a bit, okay, are you a technology company or are you a manufacturing company? And it'd be interesting to get into that a little bit. So, and you mentioned when we sort of very first spoke that there was tension between being a technology company and a manufacturing company. So what did you sort of mean by that?
It's an interesting thing, and speaking about our space, our company. Obviously, where it started off, and it started through a university, and you've got guys who are much more academic, and they've developed this thing, and they sit in the lab, and we make samples, and we do testing, and we do this, and we do that, and then you get to the stage where you've got a product. In the Kenoteq space, and it's right. We need a small factory, and it was always deemed to be a small factory. The idea was never going to be that that factory will supply the rest of the world, because volume wise it was never capable. But then once the factory starts, then understanding that the group of people that created the product now are very different from the group of people that need to run, maintain, plan, and execute the
Mm,
factory. We are a small team, and the members are all still there together. But the idea of now what you need to run that factory from what you needed to create that product is vastly different.
mm,
It's probably part of the discussion that we can get more into around saying what are those requirements and so on. But yeah, so you've got people that have created this product, and now it's say, well, what are we going to do with it? Are we going to make it?
mm,
Or are we gonna just sell the technology of it? And the methodologies required to go forward in either side, vastly different, vastly
mm,
different, and trying to get that understanding. And not only that as well, is we as a collective, what is our skill base and what would we be good at? Because it's like everything, if one day you're an electrician, tomorrow you can't go and be an airline pilot. You need to learn and you need to have experience. And if you want to be, I mean, you could, you may not have a successful career. Sorry, I mean, you can do whatever you want, I guess. If someone's going to give you the key to the claim. But yeah, we know that, the right people is super
mm.
critical to running the right job or the right business.
Yeah, absolutely. We spoke to someone yesterday who talked about that journey in terms of sort of academic to commercialization. And as you say, very, very what you were building then is now very different to what you then need to commercialize it.
Absolutely.
But you can't just go, right, we'll just do a brand new team now because we hired them for that purpose and we need that. We'll just get,
Yeah.
you can't do it like that, can you? So
No, not at all.
yeah, very challenging. And then how difficult is it to scale sort of manufacturing capital efficiently, would you say?
I mean, very difficult. And the word capital in that is probably the key thing. So, manufacturing plants are capitally intensive. And again,
Yeah.
maybe just to touch back on that last question, developing a product, you need finances, you need support, you need facilities, but you typically have a small group of people. You don't necessarily need an awful lot of financial backing to do that. But if you're going to start building a factory,
Mm,
you need an awfully large capital input. Even for a small factory, you need a lot of money. It's quite simple. Now, the efficiency part, I guess, then is going to relate to how quickly you can get that paid back, and that starts a whole new conversation around, well, what do you do and how do you do it? Because if you want to build a factory, and for want of a better word, it's £10 million to build a factory, how is that going to position you with sales, and how are you going to pay that back? So that for me would be part of that sort of efficiency, to deploy the capital you have to create the capacity to support the market need that's going to pay to further fund your business, or fund your business, keep your business afloat.
yeah.
So yeah, there's I think there's several questions in that one, in terms of how it gets there.
Yeah.
But I guess the other thing is, it's only money, as they say. If you've got an endless pot, if you are Manchester City, for example, it's a bit easier to build a team if you were Brentford or something like that.
Yeah.
No
Yeah.
disrespect to Brentford, if there's any Brentford fans out there listening. It's all about money.
Yeah, yeah.
It's all about money.
I think the Brentford fans would appreciate the anecdote. I think they get it, so
I
don't
hope
worry.
so. I hope so. We
Yeah,
won't be giving my address away anytime soon.
yeah.
I
No,
apologize for that, did it?
no. So then, with that in mind, so at what point does licensing become more attractive than direct production?
I think that that'll depend on the model and what you set out to do. I guess, for us, that is typically where we believe our future will lie. Like we said, we've got the manufacturing plant, which can stand on its own and it can pay certain bills, but it won't allow you to take that next step and getting into the volumes. And as we mentioned earlier, if we want to start bringing the price down, we've got to bring that economy of scale into place again. So if you go and license, and hopefully the partner that you are licensing or giving the license to, the assumption could be slightly wrong, but the assumption would be you'd be looking for someone who has at least a large amount of the kits or the production facility or capacity to be able to produce it. So they wouldn't have any significant further capital outlay. Their costs are already sunk in what they've got, and they would be then all be able to produce at higher volumes. So they'd reduce the overhead significantly.
Mm,
Whereas if you wanted to be that manufacturer, you're going to have to spend that capital, and your overhead carries on rising. So that economy of scale and getting those sales in, is only going to come way further down the line. So it would bring you back to what your shareholder expectations are, what your initial investment strategy was,
mhm.
and of course, do you have the ability to raise that level of capital to be able
Yeah.
to build that plan? So, licensing out, we've already got in our simple model, we've already got the technology. A license agreement, in essence, is just a couple of people sitting around a table agreeing some numbers and signing some paperwork, and away you
Mm,
go from there, which is vastly different to trying to raise significant capital, building a plan, which again, the time involved with building a plant, can be 12 to 24 months, depending what it is. A licensing fee, depending on what your partner has, you could be on, hitting the road 3 to 6 months. So, timing is always a key element. So yeah, go back to where you started. What was it you wanted to achieve? There's a lot of value in manufacturing. Of course,
mm.
it is a much longer term return. So yeah, what do you want to see? What are your financial goals out of your business, and what do you want to
Yeah.
do? But for us, probably getting into licensing would be the right thing.
Yeah. I mean, from an outsider looking in with no experience in the industry, I think it almost seems like why would you do it yourselves rather than just enabling others to do it? Because
Yeah,
you're not just talking about the manufacturing; it's a technology element to it, and that takes time, and you feel like you're just adding another massive obstacle. And as you said earlier, that the cost of actually saying, yeah, we're going to do this ourselves are like eye-watering just to even get to the point where you can start manufacturing. So it just feels like you're making the journey more painful than it needs to be almost.
absolutely. I think there's a couple of things with the licensing as well, and going back to the question: are we technology or in manufacturing? If we're going to license out the technology, that doesn't just stop on our doorstep. It
Mm,
opens up to a global market, because as long as there's raw materials available, which in a large part of the world, the materials we use are typically available. So that and the international supply chains nowadays are really, really strong. So for that extra level of growth to globalize the product, it'd be a lot easier. I mean, you can imagine, as much as we've said, building a factory in the UK, building your own factory in the UK is one thing. Trying to build your own factory in a different country is something totally different. So, if you look at that, because building your factory, you will build it with a capacity in mind, which may or may not be able to scale up again from there. So that is quite restrictive. But selling a technology, you can sell it to anyone. There's many, many places. So it would invariably be a lot easier to grow and give you a much bigger market to grow into if you look on the world stage.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally makes sense. And then we sort of touched on earlier, academic to commercialization, but from an operational standpoint, when you move from invention to industrial level delivery, what has to change? And that also feels two completely different companies again.
Yes, absolutely is, and I think that's what we touched on a little while back. Yeah, your people totally different, your skill set totally different, your mindset totally different. In development, you expect failures, if you like. Not everything you make will test to the right way that you want it. You won't always get the results. So your mindset is, okay, we expect a level of failure, we'll try again. If you're running a factory and coming in and think, well, we may make a whole lot of rejects today, but that's okay, we'll try again tomorrow. that's not going to get you very far. Understanding that you do have problems in the factory, but your approach to it is probably a bit tougher. The outcome when you're producing should invariably be known. You know what you're doing through the previous work you've done. So yeah, your mindset, your approach, were you developing something, having a very wide open sort of thought process, a great entrepreneurial spirit, those kind of traits are all well needed. The guy running the machine on the floor, you don't really, you give him parameters. You don't want him to go, maybe today I'm going to do this. You don't want him to do that. You want people to think on the feet and you want to empower them, of course, but there's a set of parameters. Make it like this and you stick with it. So, not just the skills, but the mindset and the approach to the different sort of fields are very different. Very, very different.
Yeah. It's difficult as well because scaling too early in manufacturing could completely destroy a client business from everything we've just talked about. So that's also something else, a dichotomy to manage as well, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And again, that comes back to, scaling invariably. And if you're a manufacturer, I guess are you making a product or are you offering a service? Scaling in the service industry is probably financially less than scaling in a manufacturing. And as much as, scaling covers a lot of areas, whether it be your machinery, whether it be your people, whether it be your distribution footprint or whatever it be. So it's very difficult because if you were to commit too soon, if you're manufacturing, you need the ability to supply the market. But where you don't know where the market is, your question is, so what capacity do I put in place? You will need to build a plan that achieves a capacity that you see in several years' time, depending on what your plan is. So again, it comes back to that capital input. You're going to spend an awful lot of money getting that plan together. But if your sales don't materialize within that period, you're going to find yourself under massive financial stress. And that, if you scale too quickly, the opposite is if you're not positioned to take advantage of certain situations in the market, how do you grow? You can't, it's very difficult to just say, well, we're going to grow incrementally at a couple of percent every year. Most startup businesses don't. You'll grow at a slow rate and you would like some level of acceleration over sort of the midterm and then maybe into stabilization again, moving into the longer term. So very difficult. I think we've said it before. It's a chicken and egg scenario. And we look at when you've decided which comes first, the chicken and the egg, then the poor thing's got to cross the road. And then you have the conundrum of why did that cross the road? So one problem leads into another, but the joys, it's not unique to us. I think we all experience that in life.
Joys of running a company. Yeah. You touched on there about financial difficulties, right? So just to change track slightly and look at things from a lens of sort of funding, runaway, and kind of, potentially sort of surviving long enough. How difficult is fundraising in industrial climate technology right now?
For us in the construction industry, it's very difficult. There's a lot of investors out there with goodwill that want to invest in the right thing. But again, a large part of investment is based on return. There's obviously a whole group of investors out there that are doing it for different reasons, that, want to create a better world for everybody, a morally upstanding reasons, if you like, and so on, and not necessarily looking at a direct sort of capital return. But most people, want to see something at the moment, and the current situation in the construction industry, and particularly in the UK, quite possibly globally as well. I think, everybody's taking strain at the moment. And when economies are down, as a large part, you usually find investment hard to come by. You obviously have people or investors very shrewd that, it's not my game. So I can only say as I see it, but, people who will take advantage when the time is right and so on. We personally, we don't, we're not a company in distress that's just looking for something and we're about to give the shares away for nothing, of course. But yeah, the current economic climate is very difficult because the construction industry has slowed significantly at the moment. And there's a lot of people taking strain. And an investor is sort of saying, well, I could actually just go and the simple look is put the money in the bank. I'll get a guaranteed small return. And then in a year or two, I can just pull it back out and relook because invariably a lot of companies, if you're not going to be experiencing growth, there's not a whole lot of reason to believe that the share value of that company will significantly rise. So as times look better, you possibly in a position as an investor to buy in at the same sort of rates as you would have been able to now, but you've had the security of the last year or two with a more simple, clear investment. So it's difficult. Like I say, it's very difficult. Some people invest for different reasons. Majority of which invariably is capital gain. That there's there's somebody for everybody ultimately, to quote a very romantic love story somewhere along the line. But yeah, there's somebody for all of us. We just need to find them.
Many fish in the sea.
Yes, the one will. Yeah.
Excellent. No, it's very true. I mean, I work with a lot of sort of energy and infrastructure funds, and I think there's maybe some of a misconception that they're all kind of trying to change the world, or the ones that are looking at the energy transition at least. But ultimately, they want to make sound investments. They have to be focused within a specific vertical that is, as a byproduct, good for the planet, good for us all. But ultimately, yeah, as you say, most of them are looking at making sound investments. Otherwise, the business model doesn't quite. So I get it. But I mean, do you think there's a bit of a misconception there sometimes with founders, specifically within the circular economy, energy transition, and clean tech? It's a very broad umbrella. But do you think that there's a misconception there around, well, we're doing good work, so surely people will want to sort of give us money to further this because it's because they buy into the cause with so much passion on a personal level. Do you think that they almost start to believe their own hype in a way and the challenges of fundraising and achieving kind of commercial sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, potentially some do. I think a lot of people getting into this type of industry, are either very passionate about it, or you can sit back. You'd like to believe that this is the way the world is moving. So there is a future for it, and it will grow. The world, it evolves, it develops, it doesn't stand still. I think what we're probably finding is the rate of implementation or adoption is just a lot slower than a lot of people thought. We touched on earlier, we're in a period at the moment where there's a couple of things in the world going on that have slowed a lot of things down with Russia and Ukraine, and obviously what's happening now in Iran and so on, and other areas of the Middle East. You don't know those things are going to happen. There's blockers. The economy slows down, investment slows down. So the implementation of it, but I suppose the simple thing is you go back, you have to have sustainable energy because oil supplies will run out at some stage. Coal will run out at some stage. Gas will run out at some stage. So whether you want to do it because you believe that we're destroying the earth, we're putting holes in the ozone and so on by our carbon footprint, or whether you just believe, well, there's a finite amount of resources out there. Where do we position ourselves after that? Now, to get certain people or certain groups of people potentially have a more short-term capitalistic belief, and that's all they're interested in. Where other groups of people, it's not about my lifetime. I'm going to try and enjoy my life while I'm here, but I want my child's life and their child's life and so on and so forth to be good. And we need to leave a legacy. So yeah, I think a lot of us we thought we'd be further on. I think a lot of people in the world did. There's pros and cons to all of it. But yeah, I would still like to think that at a point in time there will be a level of acceleration that starts catching. The green sustainable ventures will start catching up, but they have to be economically viable. Something we spoke about earlier. Because that will always be a challenge, because generally in life, buy what you can afford.
Yeah. What do you think a fundable industrial climate business looks like today?
I mean, we talking earlier about saying you can't rely on policy. So, a climate business, just like any other business, you need a product or a service that people want. You need a product or a service that is sustainable, whether that be through environmentally sound principles, or just because it's available, the materials and the resources and so on going in are always going to be sustainable. And like a lot of things as well, you can have the right product, but I think a large part of business is always going to come down to the group of people that run the business and have the right people in the right place, particularly in tough times. You need those people with unwavering belief, with emotional robustness, and so on. So it's not just skill and experience and expertise. You can, you can see, you can read a resume or whatever, but that inherent traits of a person and their ability to, see the upside. Yeah. And that ability to create the team and the strength within the team. That's what's going to drive the business forward, whether it be tough times or good times. Yeah. You need have the product, but have the skill within the company to be successful. That I think that's true with every business.
Yeah. Have you read, slightly off topic, have you read Good to Great?
I haven't, no.
Okay. I'll
Is
send
that,
you a copy. There's a section in that which talks about getting the right people on the bus. Just to your
it's,
point about having the right people in the right position. So
it,
it's
it's,
really interesting.
there's a book, the upside of the downturn. One of the books I have read, and that talks about that as well. Is when things are bad, if you have the ability to do so, that's when you should be repositioning. And largely, what that talks about as well is getting those good people potentially from somewhere else. So while certain companies are downsizing, you should be, whether you're upsizing or upskilling, but you should be repositioning again. So, but it talks about the people and having the right people, because when things turn, you need the ability to act. You don't want to have to rebuild something, switch something on 12 months down the line. You've missed that opportunity. So, but yeah, it's about the people. It's about the people.
Exactly that. Hardest challenge for most people to solve.
That it's a funny thing. Yeah, when I went into management, started in management, and then moved up, and then started getting a level of management under myself. It's one of the things that I always tell them when they take the job. This is the hardest thing you're ever going to have is the people, because that's always the variable. Manufacturing plants have a process. Machines work like this, or they break, but they work like this. But people are wildly different. They are absolutely incredible, and they can be totally awful. So take your pick,
And
manage accordingly.
therein lies the joy.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so then on that sort of the people part, scaling teams and capability, how do you feel sort of hiring evolves as a business moves towards that sort of commercial scale?
Massively, Alex, massively. I mean, again, and we've sort of spoken about it in a couple of our different little sectors here. You've got to fill the requirement, and I guess part of that as well. It's not just filling a requirement. When you're a growing business and you have a view, so over 5 years, you're moving from a point to another point. You can't just be hiring people that are going to do the job today, because you don't want to be hiring people every 6 months or every 12 months. You need to be putting people in place that not only fulfill the requirement now, but can take that journey with you and take responsibility for the execution of that journey in their own little fields as well. So finding the right people with the right skills and the right mental abilities, personal traits, and so on is absolutely critical. Understanding that the job that we do today in a new business is not going to be the same as the job you do in 5 years. And ideally, you would not have massive turnover in that period, but have the people that grow and have the ability to add value and create that upturn in the business as it evolves and as it sort of travels towards the goal that you set yourself when you started.
Yeah.
Very different from a business that's been there 100 years of, largely doing the same thing day in, day out.
Mm,
But
mm,
again, you also have elements as you grow. Somebody sitting in an office and speaking to somebody at a transporter and saying, send me one truck a week is vastly different from somebody planning multiple complex loads into various regions of the country, but with various delivery requirements and due dates and so on and so forth. So that, the skills and the knowledge required to be able to do that. As the volume increases, typically the complexity increases and the
yeah.
requirement of improvement, to get it. There's one of the things I've always believed in, there's not an awful lot of things that I come up with and I say to my people. There's a lot of good stuff out there that you can share with people. But, one thing I think we can always say there, that the only constant in life should be that it's going to change, which, sounds a bit odd, but that's exactly it. So, I can tell you
Mm,
today that it will change, and tomorrow I'll tell you again, it will change again.
yeah.
So you need the skill and the ability to be able to adapt with that.
Yeah.
You'll
Absolutely.
have a level of staff turnover, but your core ability, I believe, needs to have a level of consistency in it if you want to be successful. That's
Yeah.
how I see it.
No, Totally agree with you. And then with Kenoteq, well, yeah, were there any sort of capabilities that became critical either after a first raise or after a certain inflection point? We just said we need that capability in the business now where we didn't need it before.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that once the project, I think I'm sort of in Kenoteq as well. I'm sort of part of that. When I joined Kenoteq, we didn't have any manufacturing expertise, but now someone trying to run a manufacturing company. So, I guess I'd be the simple example of that. As we develop now, we're very fortunate. We have an exceptionally good team. Obviously, now we need to grow our manufacturing capabilities. We need to grow our commercial capabilities. We have a fantastic lady who's a head of business in Lucy Black. Lucy needs people within her team now to get out into the field to increase the sales and so on. So yeah, they just after we had the product or made or released the product, if you like, was a period when the product became available, but we're still waiting on certification. You're out there, you're marketing, you're creating the awareness and so on and so forth. But now it's, full scale available. Now you've got to start getting into the smaller areas and start, marketing is one thing, direct sales is another. So there's definitely elements of skill there. But yeah,
Yeah,
definitely as you move on, it grows and we will expand and add additional skills to create, to be able to facilitate that expansion.
exciting times. And do you feel there's a sort of a kind of person or type of person that sort of thrives within that sort of industrial climate business?
Yes, I mean, yes. But yeah, I mean, industrial environments can be quite robust, I guess, for want of a better word. If there's any people who work in factories listening to that, they're probably going to have a giggle at that and probably translate that into a few harsher words in their own mind. Yeah, there's a very big difference between working in a nice warm office with the coffee machine down the road as opposed to working in a noisy factory where you've got safety concerns, you've got practices and policies, you've got to keep your eyes open, keep your fingers out of things, keep your PPE on. Depending on where you work, it can be cold, it can be hot. The mentality and the requirement, to do that is different. And you guys, you'd be the same. Why would you want to go and work in a cold, dirty factory? I like machinery. We're based on a farm. I love seeing the farm equipment. And I think it's amazing machinery. People are looking to how can you get excited about a tractor? But it's a feat of engineering. That's me. So
Absolutely.
everybody to their own.
Mm.
But it is a mindset, as we said earlier, there's something for everybody, so yeah, there's a type of person, for
Yeah,
sure,
yeah,
there's a person.
yeah. I mean, I would also like that. Just the child in me, just seeing big machines
Yeah,
working is fascinating. And what they can do these days it blows your mind, right? And,
incredible.
where the business is now, then it seems to me that there'd be quite a difficult aspect for you in your role in balancing sort of technical innovation with commercial execution.
Yeah, I think again, I would, in my mind, that how difficult that is will come down to your ability to resource. They are two different things. If you have the ability to resource your company in the aspects of let's run this operational side and there's the operational team and let's have an R&D side and develop. And as much as they run hand in hand, they operate individually and their focuses are individually managed, So it depends how you can do it. The other thing is obviously for that technological development, you need to have something in the market and have the feedback to, understand, do I need the technological development? Now we know that there's a couple of things that we'd like to improve on, but there is the side as well. If everybody's happy, you have to preempt what's going to happen in the future and look to the future and so on. But if everybody's happy, why do I want to go and spend a whole lot of money and time at the moment, unless it's going to have a direct output in terms of, yes, it does make probably the product cheaper, which would make people even happier.
Mm.
So you've got to balance that off and you've got to understand what the customer's requirements are. And there are, it's that whole scenario where, somebody comes up with an incredible product and it's like, wow, that's brilliant, but nobody wants it. So it's useless.
Yeah, yeah.
So get that
You
feedback
see,
from the market.
yeah, you see it all the time, don't you? People trying to solve a problem that isn't actually that doesn't exist.
Absolutely.
And sometimes you hear these things, you think, okay, well, I don't believe that's a problem. So you're going to have a real problem selling that.
Yeah.
Same with you internally. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're trying to tweak it and advance it, but you're actually trying to solve a problem that hasn't been told to you, then don't
Yeah.
spend the money on it. You're totally right. You're totally right.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, again, it comes down to, the bigger companies have better resources and can look to the future, and how many new innovations come out. I mean, let's be honest, in the brick industry over the last couple of thousand years, how many innovations do you think have taken place? It's probably now the last sort of 5 or 6 years that everybody's trying to enter this low carbon space that you're actually seeing any innovation. Now, there's ourselves and one or two others. A lot of a couple of the brick companies are doing certain things to make improvements and reduce their carbon footprint, and they're doing great jobs. Any advance is great. It really is. We don't entertain, or we don't go into negative marketing, if you like. I'm not going to say bad things about it. As far as we're concerned, to the level of recycled content and so many, we are the leaders. We've done it a bit differently. We embrace circular economy to a greater extent than most. The low carbon footprint is just a result of that. One of many advantages of embracing circular economy. But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially overall circular economy, energy transition. We all win together, right? And everybody has their little piece to play.
That was a quick one. No worries. Okay, then. So thinking about sort of maybe founder perspective and sort of forward signals, what belief about scaling a climate technology business has changed most for you since before you sort of were in this space? You probably had some preconceived ideas and beliefs. So what sort of changed?
Now, yeah, that is something that you sort of have pondered. As a leader, you always want to try and take some reflection and try and understand it. I don't think that, for me personally, there's not a huge amount that's changed. I think what we've said earlier as well, the rate of implementation of a lot of this has probably been the sort of sticking point. We did think that we'd be further down the line. There's those things, legislation that's been touted and just never, or regulations, and it's just never been put into legislation. So I don't think there's an awful lot really that's sort of changed in my mind as to what's needed. Yeah, the timing has been disappointing. And again, you understand, there's people that believe in this. There's people that understand it and sort of go with the flow. And then you get a whole lot of people that are just like, nah, this is just an awful lot of rubbish. This is just, man didn't walk on the moon in Area 66 and there's aliens and things like that. Everybody to their own, and you got to love everybody for it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think too much has changed personally, other than that sort of rate of implementation. We're a bit more hopeful, a bit more adventurous with our targets.
Yeah. I think most people that have come into the space, very, very similar view of that as well. So yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I don't like the term advice, but what sort of words of wisdom would you give any sort of founders who are starting or thinking about commercializing industrial technologies? Anything that you think you would pass on to them?
I wouldn't say it's wisdom. I think it's just general sort of common business knowledge. But get your investment in place and make sure you have contingencies, because the road is not straight. You need to be able to pivot. You need to be able to replan, and ideally have a level of investment behind you that allows for delays and change in direction and so on, because it won't be straightforward. You will need to make change. You may need to look at different directions. And I can't think at the moment off the top of my head of anything that's come close to materializing in the time frame that we ever hoped or thought it would. So give yourself more time, give yourself the financial ability, that runway, to be able to operate in difficult times, and that flexibility to potentially try a bit of a different twist on what you thought you were going to do. If you've got the right people and you have a product, it goes without saying, whatever your product or service is, it needs to be needed. We just said earlier, you can create something that's fantastic, but nobody wants it. It doesn't help. It's realistic business plan, but have that ability. Take a bit more time than you think, and get a bit more financial support than you think, because it can be a tough road. If things work out and things go to plan, then you're just left with a bit more money in the bank than you thought you would be, or you thought you would have rather. So
Yeah.
what's
It's
the
only an
problem with
upside.
that? Yeah, what's
Yeah,
the problem with
absolutely.
that?
And look, I think what you and Kenoteq are doing and what you're trying to disrupt, I think is brave, it's venturous, and I think it's amazing. So, but it's tough, obviously. So let's finish on a high. Like, what really gives you sort of optimism about where the market is heading for you guys?
There are an awful lot of people out there that we come across that want to do the right thing in terms of sustainable products and the sort of green economy and so on, and that belief is growing. It's like I said, we need more of it. We need more of it in the right places and so on. But there's a lot of people that want to go down this route, and there's a lot of good in the world, and through all the bad, and all the things, and the hole in the ozone and the global warming and so on, and things that we believe are real, and some people don't. We believe are real. We do believe that our products can contribute, even at the smallest level, to making an improvement. So yeah, there's that level of positivity. I mean, if we didn't have that, tomorrow would be a really bleak day anyway. So but we do believe, yeah, hold on to that. You've got to, without, at the risk of sounding very naive, you have to believe in the good of mankind. Put
You
one
do.
foot forward, head down, keep going. We shall
Absolutely.
succeed.
Good
So,
stuff.
yeah.
Well, I think we're basically out of time, but look, wish you all the success of it. We'd love to have you back on in a year's time to see how things are going, to see how things have advanced. But I think it was a really interesting discussion. So yeah, thanks and appreciate your time.
Thanks, Alex and Will. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.